So, thank you for joining me today. This is Katya, and Katya and I met probably about 2 years ago now. I met her through a friend who had recommended you for a Reiki session, which I felt was exactly what I needed at the time. It was kind of when I first realized that I had PTSD after having it for about a year and a half, without really acknowledging what all of that meant. And then we kind of forged a bond, and we have done some things in the past, and most recently we've been doing the yoga psychotherapy course, which I and many of the students have found really beneficial. So how did you get into the yoga psychotherapy world, I suppose?
I suppose it has to do a little bit with the history of my life. I've lived with many difficult feelings throughout my upbringing: anger, depression, anxiety, you name it, suicidality, all sorts of things, and struggled with that for the first few decades of my life. And then eventually in my late 20s I found yoga, and yoga was this massive paradigm shift for me, and I realized that I could live a more peaceful, joyful, harmonious, balanced life in ways that I never suspected were possible and that were never taught to me. And when I say yoga, I don't mean the postures. The postures are a little bit of yoga, but I mean like the whole philosophy and the values and beliefs, the belief systems that are like 5,000-year-old. And so I started to learn that, and that sort of transformed me completely. I started eventually, later on, teaching that, and I saw the same transformations in people that were happening to me, and that was just such a privilege to just be a part of that. And then I thought, wow, I need to bring this into the mental health system, because people with different traumas, different conditions were just healing naturally. And so I started to become a psychotherapist so that I could bring this in, and that's my passion, to use yoga for mental and emotional health.
And so for the course that we've been doing, I guess we have about 2 months left. One thing that I had with my prior knowledge to yoga was that it was postures, just postures. I know that they would kind of, when I'd go to the gym, let's say I'd go with a friend to an outside yoga class that had all the beautiful candles and all these sorts of things, they would kind of walk me through what my body should be doing, and like what my breath should be doing, and perhaps grounding me a little bit with thought processes and things like that. But I know for me, one of the things that has been extremely beneficial is the time that we've had to kind of discuss things like chakras, which for me was quite abstract before, and maybe I wasn't really open to something like that. But now I really have started to understand how my mind and my body are very much connected, how everything within my body is connected, how then the chakras connect to my organs and all these sorts of things. And it's been, just that knowledge alone has been really surprising. And so when you first learned about those aspects, what sort of surprised you and helped you understand kind of how to help yourself?
Well, that was one of the things that I really loved about this system, is that it's so kind of self-empowering.
Yeah.
I know now that if I am sort of emotionally shut off, my heart feels a little bit closed, I can't connect to other people, or that if specific feelings around it are happening, then I know that it's my heart chakra that's a little bit unbalanced, and then I can do practices or postures or kind of embody philosophies that will help balance that chakra, and hence balance those emotions that relate to that chakra, and balance the organs that relate to that chakra, for instance, the heart. So the same with other chakras, if I'm feeling, feelings like anger or pride or ego-related feelings, I'll start to realize, oh, okay, so my manipulative chakra, my belly chakra is imbalanced. So here are the practices that I can do, or the things that I can think about to put in place in my life and embody, so that the belly chakra can become balanced. So it's really empowering because you get the tools to actually fix whatever's happening in your life at any given stage, because you can be balanced in one moment and then something happens in your life and it just throws you off balance.
Yes.
So if you have the tools to actually heal yourself rather than go to some professional where you have to pay like $200 an hour, you know, that's just a lot more empowering for people.
And one of the things for me is that is it 8 postures in each chakra?
Oh, there's probably heaps of
Yeah.
them, but yeah,
The modality that we've been using is 8. And so I find that a lot of times when I do the yoga, and I've been perhaps a little bit more diligent in trying to do it every single day, that I tend to choose a lot of the postures from the first chakra, the Muladhara chakra, which we both know for me was very much out of whack because it has to do with feeling safe and grounded. And when you have had perhaps a form of trauma that's maybe you feel has taken that from you, laying just the foundation for the rest of it has been, as you know, challenging for me, but it's been really helpful. And I know that a lot of the people that have been coming have had other imbalances, and they've been able to sort of have the anxiety around acknowledging that and then pushing through that, which has been really wonderful. I think one of the things you said is that there's sort of the vibrations that you can take from the space and from the group doing the postures around you is also really beneficial. Yeah. And so can you just speak to the fact that when you're in a room with a group of people that it can actually be it changes the frequency of the room?
Yeah, true. Definitely. I think our group, and that's my experience of these kinds of groups, they become like a little family. We call it a yoga tribe. Because we're all in a vulnerable space. We've all been through difficulties, traumas, different experiences, and yoga is the type of thing that will you really sort of need to be looking inwards to see what parts of you are interacting with the reality and co-creating the reality that you're in. And so it comes from a vulnerable place, and which means, but we're all in it together, so we're accepting each other's vulnerabilities, which for a lot of people is a new experience, to actually be accepted in their vulnerability and supported in their vulnerability. So, and then because of all the teachings and all the kind of ancient things that yoga is bringing, there's a particular frequency, like the vibration in the room is quite elevated, because you're all talking about things that have to do with a kind of higher form of consciousness. So it really elevates us together as a whole, and we experience new ways of being that relate to some of those higher frequencies and drop some of those lower ones. So it's a really wonderful experience to share.
One of the things that we've talked about a bit in the class is about the ego, and for me, I'm not sure that I was really acknowledging how much my ego was coming into play with perhaps holding me back with moving on with my trauma, which I found really interesting. And as we've discussed before, I had trauma in my childhood, then was sort of maybe masking that by finding an outlet that was giving me my endorphins, and all my focus was on that, and so I was sort of blocking things out and not. I think there was definitely something happening within, but that my mind was trying to shut that off by giving all of my attention to something else. And then when the thing that I put all my attention towards, then and my joy and everything was wrapped up in that, when that got taken from me, my ego just could not handle the fact that I was no longer able to have that as an outlet, that my whole identity felt like it changed, that everything that I had known was no longer, what was the reality for me. And I couldn't let it go. I mean, it's been like 3 years, and it's only in a recent class that I said that I think I finally have been able to accept it, which I feel was really holding me back. I do. I feel that. And I can remember one of our support group sessions when someone had acknowledged that they could see that I really hated myself, that I hated this new version of myself, and I did. And I'm not sure I'm like at the point where I love yet this new version of myself, but at least I've accepted it now. And so now the hard work, I think, can really begin to kind of like build something that wasn't there before, and perhaps as for you will be beneficial for me to kind of move ahead and live my life in an even more enriching way, where I'm able to acknowledge everything,
Yeah, definitely. I think acceptance is a huge part of things. And from a yoga point of view, I describe people like a sun. So we have all this kind of peace, generosity, love, like amazing gifts inside of us, just ready to shine. But because of all the traumas and all the like horrible things that happened in our lives, we start to create these little clouds. The clouds to protect us, they had a really good role to protect us and all these things, but we create clouds and clouds and clouds around us until we can't see the sun that we are anymore, and other people can't see the sun that we are anymore, and because of the clouds we can't see the sun in other people anymore. So this is the process of starting to dissipate some of those clouds in a safe way that feels possible at any given stage, so that we can shine again. It's not about learning something foreign. It's about uncovering something that's already within. And I get to see people like you who had so much like in the way of shining their own light, and then that just starts to dissipate, and it's just, I don't know.
It's really good. And so can you speak a little bit to how the ego played in your transformation as well? Because I know we've talked a bit about how, it's kind of like a tree, and you acknowledge these things. So how did shifting your perceptions and your acknowledgement of your ego change your course in relation to your being able to manage PTSD?
Wow. How long have you got?
Maybe like 15 minutes? I don't know how much memory you've got on the tongue.
I mean, I think the only thing I can probably do is give one example, because there'll be like thousands of examples, but just something to illustrate an example of an ego. So there was this one person who's been in my life for years and years, and this person has a lot of anger. And it was always really difficult for me, and the way that I've responded to that was to be angry back and to fight, to go on with the fight. I've always found that, if I don't fight, then I've lost. So all the fight ego also coming in, and all those egos juggling. And one day, I was in my late 20s, and I was talking to a spiritual person, and this person gave me an example of a pen. So he held a pen, and he said, if I try to give you this pen, the pen was anger. If I try to give you this pen and you don't accept, and I try to force it onto you, here, have this pen, have this pen, have this pen, and you never accept it. In the end, he asked me, who's got the pen? I said, well, you've got the pen. So he was trying to say that I don't have to buy into anger. Just because someone is angry and trying to, make me angry doesn't mean that I have to buy into it. I can make a different choice and not accept the pen. And in the end, they'll get the anger. So I was having lunch, and this person was trying to give me this huge pen of anger, you know, and just expecting me to respond, because that's what I've always done. And I just didn't do it. I made a different choice, and it was like really difficult that first time I did it. He was completely puzzled, and nobody else could understand what was going on, because that was just very unlike me. But in that moment, I understood that I had a choice. I didn't have to do what I'd always done. I've learned that there was a different way, that I could look at that with compassion for the other person, and compassion for myself as well. And I didn't need to become someone who I didn't want to be. Because when I was in anger, I didn't like myself. I ended up being someone who I don't like in order to fight someone else's war. So this is just one example of something that was holding me back from being the person who I really wanted to be. And because of one teaching, because there's so many, I was able to shift something in myself.
And I think it's really important to like acknowledge as well that for yourself and for anyone else on this journey, you do have points where you kind of like progress, and then you might go back a little bit, and then you progress again, and then you and one thing that you've been really good about teaching all of us, and I think one thing that I've really struggled with for myself, is kind of allowing myself the space to regress, and that's okay. I can get to the point where I kind of like start to beat myself up over it, like moved past this, like why is this still happening? But I mean, it is a mental health condition, and to expect that you're just going to be 100% better immediately and never have any other hiccups again is just, it's not realistic. And I think one thing that's been really positive is that we've all sort of been learning how to cope with having had trauma or PTSD, and that doing things like yoga or meditation or learning about how to ground yourself, all of these techniques, you know, we talked about like the toolkit kind of, all of these things can be used when you get to the point of being triggered or unwell. And for me, for example, when I was driving here today, you never know when a trigger is going to come. You just never know. I'm not at the place where I've had my trauma occur, but those things are still peppered throughout life. They're still there. And I pulled up behind a car that had a logo on it referring to my trauma, which I wouldn't have acknowledged because they've since changed their like vehicle signage. And what I did was I just started singing a song. I've started doing this now when I see a variety of different things, whether it be helicopters, whatever. And I sing myself a song, and that seems to work for me. Now that doesn't mean that it's going to work for somebody else, but that's something that I've discovered works for me, and it changes my brain from thinking about that specific thing. I try to shut it out and move away from it, that I sing a song. And that's something that works for me. Yoga works for me sometimes. Grounding works for me sometimes. So what have you found useful for you? Obviously yoga. And then what are some of the other things that you have found useful?
Other things, I think psychotherapy can be useful as well in terms of establishing a safe environment where you can sort of start to rethink about some of the barriers that you've created against the world, because the world feels like a really dangerous place. And particularly the kind of, if you have the kind of psychotherapist that is able to include body and spirit in that process, because trauma is manifested in the body as well. And a lot of, like I work for Auckland Hospital, and I work a lot with people with psychosomatic illness, so the idea that emotions are so hard for us to bear that they just express through the body because the mind just can't really sort of go there. So through psychotherapy you can sort of start to be in a safe environment where those emotions now feel possible to be explored, because they were impossible. You know, if you suffered trauma when you were 6, that's unbearable. Like, you've got no framework to actually understand what's happening to you, to process, to have support around it.
And
But
it's affected your entire trajectory as
Yeah,
well. So I
that's
mean,
right. Yeah.
you don't really know who you were before that as well.
No. So, like in my life, for my traumas, when I was young, it all seemed overwhelming. There's no way I could have had the tools to sort of really overcome anything. Like I did the best I could, and like any other trauma survivor, I did great in surviving so far. But then there's the aftermath. So my body was expressing illness, and I was holding back in a lot of ways, and I couldn't relate to other people like in healthy ways. And isolation is one of the big things about trauma, disempowerment,
Yes.
all those things. And I think psychotherapy can also help with the, I guess, relational element because you get a new experience of relating to a human being, that maybe you can open up a little bit more, feel that maybe it's safe to have a deeper connection, things like that. And also the spirit to include, because trauma can be like soul crushing.
Yes.
You can sort of disconnect from a kind of higher reality and just sort of survive through life. So reconnecting with your kind of true self. So that's one thing, psychotherapy. And another thing is havening, which is my most recent technique that I've learned. I think it's originally from the US and the UK now, which is about havening. Well, psychotherapy is long term, but havening is very short term. Like sometimes in a session, sometimes in 15 minutes, we see people moving from having a trauma from like ages ago to like having a trauma. And because the idea is that it disconnects the emotional charge of that's kind of imprinted into the neurons of that trauma. So from the actual memory of the trauma. So you still remember the trauma, the memory of it, but it's not emotionally charged and triggering.
Interesting.
So
Ooh, I
that's
look forward to that.
Really, it's based on neuroscience, so that's.
And one of the things that we should probably talk about is, I know sometimes in the class, some people might have felt guilty that they weren't doing yoga every day and this sort of stuff, but yoga is not just the postures. Yoga is about reframing the way that you think about things. It's about acknowledging when your ego is sort of adding to a situation, and it's more than just a posture, a set of postures. It's a kind of a new way of life. And I think one thing that ends up happening with a lot of us, including myself, is it's really easy to kind of acknowledge what you think you're not doing or what you could be doing better, but not celebrating the baby steps, the small steps you're taking to kind of progress. And this is such a difficult mental health condition to have. And that's why there is like no 100% cure, I suppose, for every specific single person out there. And you are the only person that I have ever met that has overcome PTSD. And I find that, learned how to manage it, I should say. I find that really inspiring, because for such a long time, I have felt exhausted. I have felt like it was impossible. I have felt like there is no cure out there, so how am I going to be okay? It's not something I can just go to the doctor for and they say, here you go, now you're going to be all better. Or you require this surgery and then some physiotherapy and you're going to be done. It's very abstract, and it's a set of circumstances that really is different for everyone. Like I get really bad flashbacks, and I think I'm only one of 2 people in our yoga course that gets that. And for some other people, the trauma is living in certain parts of their body. And although I have, an overactive cortisol, I don't have maybe an organ that I can sense is 100% deficient and requiring me to go to the hospital or things like that. So, I just find it really inspiring. So do you want to talk about, maybe we've kind of covered the postures, but perhaps the other principles involved in yoga?
Yeah, for sure. So yoga, the way it's been brought to us by Patanjali, the person that brought all the yoga teachings together, and he talks about 8 limbs of yoga, or 8 parts of yoga. So the first 2 are called yamas and niyamas, and so they are the yamas are the how to relate to other people, how to behave with other people in a way that's ethical and considerate. Things like compassion instead of anger, or honesty, or things like that. How do you behave in the world because you live with other people and things and animals and trees and all of it? How do you behave externally? Then you've got the niyamas, which are about what values and principles you have towards yourself. So how do you remove the toxicity that we have, like in body and mind? How do we connect with higher aspects of ourselves rather than be involved in so much materialistic things, things like that are internal. So that's kind of the philosophy. Those 2 are within that there's like thousands of values and beliefs and principles that sort of help explain the world. Those 2 are really huge. Then there's asana, so the postures. We don't need to talk about that because every possible fitness gym talks about it, even though I guess the difference is that we use those postures for mental health, and the course that we do, we use them for mental health in terms of each posture has a goal, which is to heal to balance a particular chakra, which means to heal particular emotions. So we use that in the context rather than just fitness.
Actually, I'd like to interject there, just because that was one thing that really worried me with the course, is that I used to have difficulty kind of like closing my eyes or not experiencing flashbacks and things like that. And one of the ways that I think this particular yoga is really helpful for me is that when you're given a posture, you do have a set of things that you're meant to kind of be thinking about as you do the posture, so that your mind is focused on what that posture is bringing to your body and bringing that energy in. And I always talk about that one where you have your feet on the ground and then you're bringing the good energy up through the earth and the bad energy out through your head. And I just love that one because I can actually, something about it makes me really feel like it's happening. So that was really helpful for me. And so what comes after the asana of the postures?
The other ones? That's a good point. Then we've got the breath, so using breath in order to, because the breath unites all of our bodies, physical, energetic, psychological, then supramental, spiritual. The breath unites all of them. So it's a really actually powerful tool for self-regulation and stress.
And didn't you say as well that most people that have trauma have trauma being held in their bottom of the bottom? Yeah, so breath is really important in try to change that habit back so that you can be facilitating all of your lungs.
That's right, we do hold a lot of trauma in the lower part of the lungs. Although with trauma-sensitive yoga or trauma groups, I would be very, very gentle in the breath exercises because breath is quite powerful. So I would probably have to go a long way before I actually introduce any breath exercises other than possibly just alternate nostril breathing or something really, really light that won't sort of trigger people.
Yes, because breath work actually does trigger me. So
and a lot of people, yes. And I do know a lot of people that have recovered from PTSD, so there's hope.
Oh, that's
not
good.
Yeah.
Let's meet all of them.
Okay. Be interesting interview. So breath. Then we've got pratyahara, which is the withdrawal of the senses. So rather than be sort of occupied thinking about the rest of the world, which doesn't actually change much, actually bringing that in and starting to focus in ourselves. Then dharana, sort of concentration, learning to focus our concentration in a single point so that we can really put energy into somewhere. And dhyana, so the meditation. So when people say, I'm doing yoga and meditation, no, you're doing yoga because meditation is one of the 8 elements of yoga. So then we've got the 7th element, which is dhyana meditation. Meditation, which is pretty straightforward in a way, which has that aim of connecting with that sort of ourselves. And then the last, the eighth one is samadhi, so the oneness, state of oneness with the universe. Yeah.
And can you describe how you might do that? Would it be sort of like, feeling the grass and, looking around? What does that encompass?
Okay, so I suppose each of the limbs of yoga has its own practices that you can do, has its own teachings around it. So what you mentioned, touching the grass probably involves part of awareness, part of sensations, part of focus, part of being in the moment. So it's probably a practice that involves so many things. Part of values of how to relate to the grass in a non-violent way. There's so much in any practice. So when students say, I haven't done any yoga, I honestly don't believe that, because so much of these things stay in our subconscious, and we keep consciously or unconsciously relating to these concepts and trying to figure them out and understanding them for ourselves. And that's when real transformation happens. It's not because you listen to me or anyone else. That's just theory. When it becomes actually something valuable is when it gets integrated and it helps transform something.
Actually, there's something I forgot to bring up when we were discussing the postures, which relates to all of that. That often the posture itself is not as important as the thought process and the acknowledgement of what your mind is meant to be channeling when you do that posture, which I found really interesting, because I always thought that it was.
Yeah, you gotta touch your toes. That's the holy grail.
Yeah, and if I don't get to my toes, or or if I don't, my downward dog is not at its best, or something like that. But actually, so many of us that come to the class have back issues or whatever, and it's really more about making your mind focus on different things. And with meditation, there's the one where you can kind of have a chant, or I quite like the I love the bowl.
Tibetan bowl.
Oh, I love the bowl, and it's so good. Just kind of listening to your surroundings. So so many of these things have other offshoots, don't they?
Yeah, that's right. Those are really good examples of practices that help with the different aspects of yoga. Yeah.
So in conclusion, it's been really helpful for me going through the yoga psychotherapy course.
It's so beautiful. Part of your journey.
And to anyone out there that is feeling like it's all too much and it's overwhelming and it's exhausting, I still have those days, but for the most part, I can finally start to sense that I'm moving in a direction that will be positive. For such a long time, I felt stuck, and I think feeling stuck is one of the most frustrating aspects, because oftentimes with PTSD comes depression, comes, my eating's gotten really bad, my alcohol intake, all of these other things that you're kind of trying to do to numb the pain for yourself, then become, it feels like almost additional things to try and work through, if that makes any sense. So there is hope. And
that's right. And there's so many clouds that, because out of necessity, we just put them there because there's no kind of hope in the horizon. We put all these things in place, and then they are the ones that get in the way, and it's just so much. And I really feel like PTSD it just adds on to the clouds, and it's just such a heavy part. And I really believe that there is an amazing, incredible human being, a sun out there ready to shine and ready for those clouds to be taken out and to shine forth as it deserves.
Yes. And I know I had said to you, I'd asked you a while back, one thing that I know you're not really supposed to think about is sort of like the future. If I'm already feeling like this now, and I've got this condition, and then something else bad happens in the future, and you can kind of go down this spiral of a thought process. But actually, every step you take towards, letting your sun shine and removing the clouds and figuring out how to manage this condition actually makes you stronger and able to understand how to work through the present moment and perhaps whatever might be out there. But I think being brought to the present, which you've helped me do, is so important, because that's really one of the key elements, isn't it? Is having all this worry about other things that might be or were or whatever really affects where we're at right now.
Yeah.
And one thing that you've done that I always sense when I'm with you is you're very grounded, even just right now. We're in this moment. You're not thinking about 15 minutes from now. You're not thinking about tomorrow. You're not thinking about, something that happened 15 years ago. You're right here with me in the present. And getting to see you do that, I think, is really helpful for myself and for the other people in the class,
Yeah. We all have moments where we can, fluctuate a little bit between past and future, but certainly the practice of trying to be in the present helps a lot, because often the present has a lot less problems than the past and the future. So it helps a little bit. And my experience of it, when you mentioned that the path, sometimes you shine a little bit more and then you go down again because something happens. But my experience of it is that it's almost like with trauma and PTSD, the self is just so kind of shrunken, like so small. And with every practice you make, every kind of moment that you put emphasis and energy onto it, it sort of grows a little bit and a little bit and a little bit.
Yeah.
And you become more and more grounded in yourself, which gives you kind of more self-esteem, self-confidence, self-acceptance, and just the ability to stay present with that self, and which means that you'll have more resilience as well. Because when something else happens, instead of immediately throwing you out of balance, if you have more of a grounded self, then you're just more resilient to that as well.
Yeah, like earlier today, having seen what I saw and being triggered, that would have made the whole day hard for me. I probably wouldn't have gone to sleep tonight properly. I probably would have tried to drink some wine to numb the pain. I mean, so just having that be a change for me is huge. It's all it's all little bits at a time. And so I just am pleased with myself when I can achieve the process that's required in that moment to move past the trigger. But I'm really working on what we've discussed before, and accepting the times when perhaps I revert back to old habits and just celebrating the progress. So
yes, and I really liked what you said before about in the lines of healing isn't a binary, like you're either healed or you're not. Like it's a progress, and it's baby steps sometimes. So it's easy to think, oh, I've still got flashbacks, so I'm back to square one. No, that's not necessarily true, because yes, if that's the only thing that defines you, like in terms of your own healing, then it's easy to think that you haven't evolved at all, you haven't healed at all. No, so you might still have flashbacks, but so much could have changed, subtle changes that you might just miss if you're not really sort of attentive to them.
Definitely. And I get about 2 months of anniversary symptoms every year where it's just like it has just happened, and I feel like it can be quite unbearable. And that's something I'm still learning how to work through. But the other time, when I'm out of that, I am making these progressions. So, having you there to kind of guide me, having these group sessions, having the ability to kind of read material and try and educate myself, all of these things will, I think, get me closer to where I want to be. And I'm so grateful for having met you and for having, getting to do the yoga course. Yeah. And if there's anyone out there that's, feeling really low and like it's all too much, we've both been there.
Yeah.
We've both been there. And there is hope. So just hang in there. And hopefully you'll find something that can help you learn to manage this condition, because we all deserve that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.